They say size matters. But what if the deadliest weapon was small enough to hide in a gambler's sleeve? Get ready to explore the 10 most feared tools of the Wild West. We'll reveal a tiny pistol that could end a giant's career with a single shot, proving that the biggest surprises often come in the smallest packages. 1. The Colt Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. If you could only pick one gun to represent the entire Wild West, this would be it. The Colt Single Action Army, or the SAA for short, was more than just a pistol. It was a symbol. When you see a cowboy in a movie, this is almost always the gun on his hip. It was so popular and so trusted that it earned a legendary nickname, the Peacemaker. Now, that's a funny name for a weapon, but the idea was that once this gun came out, the argument was pretty much over, one way or another. So, what made it so special? Well, for starters, it was incredibly tough and reliable. The wild frontier was a harsh place. You had dust, dirt, rain, and mud. You needed a tool that was going to work every single time you pulled the trigger, with no questions asked. The Peacemaker was exactly that. It was simple to use and easy to fix. It had 6 chambers, which was plenty for most situations. A gunslinger could load 5 shots and rest the hammer on the empty 6th chamber for safety. This way, he wouldn't accidentally have a discharge if he dropped the gun or if it got bumped while riding his horse. Truth be told, it was a beautiful piece of machinery, perfectly balanced and easy to point. Famous lawmen like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson carried them. Notorious outlaws like Billy the Kid and John Wesley Hardin used them too. It was the great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were big or small, strong or weak. If you were fast and accurate with a Peacemaker, you could stand your ground against anyone. It was the gun that every man wanted, and the gun that everyone respected. It truly was the spirit of the Old West, captured in steel and wood. The Peacemaker was the ultimate sidearm, a true classic, but it only held 6 shots and you had to load them one by one. What if you needed more firepower? What if you needed a weapon that could keep the trouble at a distance and shared a special secret with the Peacemaker itself? 2. The Winchester Model 1873 rifle, the gun that won the West. Every legendary hero needs a trusty sidekick, right? For the Colt Peacemaker, that sidekick was the Winchester 1873 rifle. This pair was like peanut butter and jelly. They just belonged together. The Winchester was so important and so widespread across the frontier that it earned its own epic nickname, the gun that won the West. And believe me, it earned that title fair and square. Here's the kicker, the absolute genius part of this rifle. It was often chambered for the exact same ammunition as the Colt Peacemaker. Think about that for a second. A cowboy or a lawman could carry one type of bullet for both his rifle and his pistol. This was a huge deal. It made life so much simpler. You didn't have to carry 2 different kinds of heavy ammo. You just needed 1 pouch of cartridges, and you were ready for anything. This convenience made the Winchester and Colt pairing the most popular choice for anyone venturing into the untamed wilderness. But the Winchester was more than just convenient. It was a fantastic weapon. It used a lever action system. After firing a shot, the user would push a lever down and then back up. This simple motion would eject the old spent cartridge and load a fresh one into the chamber. It was fast, smooth, and allowed a person to fire off a whole bunch of rounds very quickly without having to take their eyes off the target. The rifle could hold up to 15 shots in its tube magazine. That's more than double what a revolver could hold. It gave a person a massive advantage in a serious disagreement. It was accurate, reliable, and could reach out and touch a target much farther away than any pistol. It was the perfect tool for hunting, for defense, and for making sure you were the one who walked away from a bad situation. A Winchester rifle was perfect for keeping trouble at a distance. But what about when trouble kicked your door in? What did you reach for when you needed to end a fight up close and personal with no room for error? 3. The double-barreled shotgun, the coach gun. Sometimes you don't need to be a perfect shot. Sometimes you just need overwhelming, undeniable force. And for that, nothing in the Wild West could beat the mighty double-barreled shotgun. This weapon wasn't fancy. It wasn't about long-range accuracy. It was about one thing and one thing only: stopping a threat right in its tracks, immediately and without any argument. Lawmen, stagecoach guards, and saloon keepers all loved this weapon. They often called the shorter versions coach guns or street howitzers. Imagine you're guarding a stagecoach full of gold. Suddenly, a gang of bandits appears on the trail. You don't have time to aim a rifle carefully. You need something that can make a big statement, fast. That's where the shotgun came in. Each barrel could be loaded with buckshot, which is basically a shell full of small, heavy metal balls. When you pulled the trigger, it sent a wide spray of these projectiles flying. You didn't have to hit a perfect bullseye. You just had to point it in the general direction of your problem, and the shotgun would do the rest. The sound of a shotgun being cocked was one of the most terrifying sounds in the Old West. That double click-clack was a universal signal that you had crossed a line and needed to back down immediately. The effect of a shotgun at close range was absolutely devastating. It was a fight ender. There was no question about it. Having two barrels meant you had a quick second shot ready to go. You could take care of two problems almost instantly. For clearing a room or defending a doorway, it was the best tool for the job. It wasn't a gunslinger's dueling weapon, but for sheer, close-quarters power, the double-barreled shotgun was the undisputed king. The shotgun was big, loud, and impossible to ignore, but it was a two-handed weapon. What if you wanted that same kind of incredible power, that same kind of fight-stopping energy, but in a pistol you could hold with one hand? Believe it or not, such a beast existed. 4. The Colt Walker, the hand cannon. Before the famous Peacemaker, there was another Colt revolver that was a true monster. This was the Colt Walker. To call it a handgun is almost an understatement. Truth be told, this thing was a hand cannon. It was the most powerful black powder revolver ever made. It was huge, it was heavy, and it was an absolute beast to handle. It was designed in the 1840s for the Texas Rangers, who needed a pistol that could hit with the force of a rifle. The Colt Walker was a six-shooter, just like later revolvers, but it was massive in every way. It weighed almost 5 pounds, which is more than twice as heavy as a modern pistol. The bullets it fired were enormous for the time. This wasn't a pistol for fast drawing. This was a horse pistol, meant to be carried in a saddle holster. When a Texas Ranger drew this weapon, it was because he intended to end the conflict right then and there. It was so powerful, it was said that it could stop not just a man, but the horse he was riding on too. But here's the kicker. All that power came with a price. The Colt Walker was not only dangerous to the person it was pointed at, it could also be very dangerous to the person firing it. These early revolvers were prone to something called a chain fire. This is when the flash from one chamber accidentally ignites the powder in the other chambers. When that happened with a monster like the Colt Walker, the gun could literally blow apart in the user's hand. Many cowboys and soldiers were injured by their own weapons. It took a brave and experienced shooter to handle the Walker. It was a true force of nature, a firearm that traded safety and convenience for raw, untamed power. The Colt Walker had unbelievable power, but it was slow and dangerous to reload. What if you needed a gun that was still powerful, but could be reloaded in the blink of an eye? The next weapon on our list solved that problem in a very clever way. 5. The Smith, Wesson Model 3. The Schofield. Speed is everything in a gunfight. The person who can get their shots off and reload the fastest often has the best chance of seeing another sunrise. The Colt Peacemaker was reliable, but reloading it was a slow process. You had to open a little gate, spin the cylinder, and push each empty shell out one by one with a rod. Then you had to load each new cartridge the same way. It took a long time you might not have. Smith Wesson saw this problem and came up with a brilliant solution, the Model 3 revolver, also known as the Schofield, which is spelled Schofield. This gun was a game changer. Instead of the slow, one-at-a-time reloading system, the Schofield used what's called a top brake design. The entire barrel and cylinder were hinged to the frame. To reload, the gunslinger would flip a latch and the barrel would snap downwards, breaking the gun in half. As it opened, an automatic ejector would pop up and kick out all 6 spent cartridges at once. Boom! All the empties were gone in a single second. Then, the shooter could drop in 6 new rounds, snap the gun shut, and be back in the fight. A skilled person could reload a Schofield in just a few seconds, way faster than any Colt. This speed made it incredibly popular with the U.S. cavalry. A soldier on horseback could easily dump his empty shells and reload without fumbling around. But it wasn't just lawmen and soldiers who loved this gun. Famous outlaws like Jesse James and Pat Garrett were also known to favor the Schofield for its quick-change artistry. It was a well-made, accurate, and powerful pistol that offered a huge advantage when things got heated. It may not be as famous as the Colt Peacemaker in the movies, but in the real Wild West, the Schofield's speed made it one of the most formidable handguns on the frontier. The Schofield was the master of the quick reload. But it was still a pistol, limited by its range. What if your adversary wasn't across the saloon, but was way out on a distant hill, almost a speck in the distance? For a job like that, you needed a rifle with the power and precision of a legend. 6. The Sharps Rifle, the Buffalo Gun. Out on the vast open plains of the American West, distance was a whole different game. A fight might not happen at 10 paces. It might happen at 500 yards, or even more. For that kind of long-distance work, you needed a special tool. You needed the Sharps Rifle. This rifle was a legend, famous for its incredible power and unbelievable accuracy. It was so good at taking down the massive American bison that it earned the nickname the Buffalo Gun. The Sharps was a single-shot rifle, but what a shot it was. It fired a huge, heavy bullet that could travel incredible distances and hit with the force of a freight train. Unlike the lever-action Winchester, the Sharps used a falling block action. The shooter would pull a lever, which would cause a solid block of steel to drop down, opening up the chamber. You'd slide in one of the massive cartridges, close the lever, cock the hammer, and you were ready to fire. It was a simple, strong, and very reliable design. Professional buffalo hunters loved these rifles. A good hunter could lie down, set up his rifle on a stand, and take down animals from half a mile away or even further. The power was necessary to get through the thick hide and bone of a 1-ton buffalo. But it wasn't just for hunting. The Sharps rifle became famous in conflicts on the plains. At the historic Battle of Adobe Walls, a group of hunters used their Sharps rifles to hold off a much larger force of Native American warriors. One hunter famously made a shot that was measured at over 500 yards, just under a mile away. That's a shot that is difficult even with today's modern technology. The Sharps rifle proved that in the wide-open West, the person with the longest reach often had the final say. A big Sharps rifle was the king of the open range. But what if you weren't on the open range? What if you were sitting at a poker table in a crowded saloon and needed a weapon that no one even knew you had? For that, you needed something much, much smaller. 7. The Derringer, the gambler's ace. Not every weapon in the Old West was a big, intimidating piece of hardware. Sometimes, the most effective weapon was the one nobody saw coming. And for that purpose, nothing beat the Derringer. This tiny little pistol was the ultimate surprise weapon. It was small enough to be hidden just about anywhere, up a sleeve, in a vest pocket, tucked into a boot, or even inside a lady's handbag. It was the gun of choice for gamblers, saloon girls, and anyone who needed a secret ace up their sleeve. The classic Derringer was a very simple weapon. Most models had 2 barrels, one stacked on top of the other. It was a single-action pistol, meaning you had to pull back the hammer before each shot. After the first shot, you'd have to cock the hammer again to fire the second barrel. It only held 2 shots, and it wasn't accurate at all beyond a few feet. Truth be told, trying to hit anything across a room with a Derringer was mostly just wishful thinking. But here's the kicker. The Derringer wasn't designed for a duel in the street. It was designed for a fight across a card table. It was a last resort weapon. When a poker game went bad and someone accused you of cheating, the Derringer was your final argument. Because it fired a large caliber bullet, it was surprisingly powerful at point-blank range. It could create a lot of chaos and give its owner a chance to escape a bad situation. Its small size and easy concealment made it a fearsome tool, not because of its accuracy or power, but because you never knew who might be carrying one. It was the ultimate weapon of deception. The Derringer offered 2 surprise shots. But what if you wanted even more surprises? What if you wanted a revolver that held more shots than a Colt and had a secret weapon that no one would ever expect? 8. The Laymat Revolver, the Grape Shot Surprise. Now we come to one of the wildest, most unusual handguns of the entire era. The Laymat Revolver was something special. Imagine a big, heavy revolver that looked kind of like a Colt but with a twist. And that twist was a nasty one. This gun was a favorite of high-ranking Confederate officers during the Civil War, and a few of them definitely found their way out west. At first glance, it looked like a normal, if slightly chunky, revolver. But a closer look revealed its incredible secret. First off, the cylinder of a Laymat didn't hold 6 shots. It held 9. That's right, 9 shots in the cylinder. That alone gave its owner a huge advantage over anyone carrying a standard 6-shooter. A person could keep firing long after his opponent thought he should be empty, but that wasn't even the main surprise. Here's the truly crazy part. Running right through the middle of that 9-shot cylinder was a second, separate barrel. And this second barrel was a shotgun. Let that sink in. The Laymat was a 9-shot revolver and a single-shot shotgun all in one weapon. The shooter could choose which barrel to fire by flipping a little switch on the hammer. If he left the switch up, it would fire one of the 9 pistol rounds. If he pushed the switch down, it would fire the shotgun barrel. Imagine being in a tight spot. You've fired a few shots, and your opponent thinks he knows what to expect. Then, with your last shot, you flip the switch and unleash a blast of buckshot. It was the ultimate surprise party, and one that nobody wanted to be invited to. The Laymat was complex, heavy, and rare. But for combining firepower with a shocking twist, it was in a class all by itself. A gun with a hidden shotgun is a terrifying thought. But all these firearms have one thing in common. They eventually run out of bullets. What did a frontiersman reach for when the fight got up close and personal and a firearm was no longer an option? 9. The Bowie knife, the frontier toothpick. In the Wild West, a fight didn't always happen at a distance. Sometimes, it was a close, desperate struggle. And when you were out of bullets, or the fight was just too close for a gun, there was one tool that every man on the frontier respected and feared: the Bowie knife. This wasn't just any knife. This was a massive blade, a short sword really, that was as much a symbol of the rugged frontier as the Colt revolver. The Bowie knife got its name from the legendary frontiersman Jim Bowie, who made it famous in a wild brawl known as the Sandbar Fight. His knife was described as being huge, with a long, sharp blade and a clipped point that made it excellent for stabbing. It also had a crossguard to protect the user's hand. After that story spread, everyone wanted a knife just like Jim Bowie's. Blacksmiths all across the country started making their own versions of the famous blade. They were often called Arkansas toothpicks or frontier toothpicks. A Bowie knife was more than just a weapon. It was an essential survival tool. A man could use it to chop wood, skin an animal, clear a trail, or fix his gear. But in a fight, it was absolutely terrifying. It was big, heavy, and could cause devastating injuries. A skilled knife fighter could be just as formidable as a gunslinger, especially in close quarters like a crowded bar or a dark alley. The sight of a giant Bowie knife being drawn was often enough to make even the toughest person back down. It was a brutal, personal weapon that required courage to use. It was a reminder that on the frontier, survival sometimes came down to a sharp piece of steel and a steady nerve. A Bowie knife was the ultimate tool for a one-on-one struggle. But what about the ultimate weapon, period? What did you use when you weren't fighting one person but you needed to face down an entire group all at once? There was one machine that changed the rules of fighting forever. 10. The Gatling gun, the first machine gun. All the other weapons on this list are personal. They are tools for one person against another. But our final weapon is something else entirely. It's a machine designed to unleash a storm of lead unlike anything the world had ever seen before. This was the Gatling gun, the grandfather of the modern machine gun. And when this weapon showed up, the nature of conflict was changed forever. Invented by Richard Gatling, this weapon was a true marvel of engineering for its time. It wasn't an automatic weapon like the ones we have today. Instead, it was operated by a hand crank. A soldier would turn a crank on the side of the weapon, and this would cause a whole series of barrels, usually 6 to 10 of them arranged in a circle, to rotate. As each barrel rotated into the top position, a cartridge would drop into it from a magazine on top. As it continued to rotate, the gun would close the bolt, fire the round, and then extract the empty shell. It was a continuous, mechanical process. The result was a terrifying rate of fire. A Gatling gun could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, a stream of lead that no group of people could stand against. While it was too big and heavy for a single cowboy to use, it was used by armies and sometimes by private groups defending mines or ranches. It was mounted on a wheeled carriage like a small cannon, and it took a team of men to operate it effectively. Seeing a Gatling gun being set up was the ultimate signal that things had escalated to a whole new level. It was a weapon of war, not a dueling pistol. It represented the end of the old way of fighting and the beginning of modern industrial warfare, right in the middle of the Wild West. It was, without a doubt, the most formidable piece of hardware on the frontier.